You think you can steal from here and walk away? People like you always try this. The manager's voice tore through the supermarket like glass shattering on tile. Every shopper froze mid-step. A mother clutched her child tighter, a cashier stopped scanning halfway through a beep. Silence spread aisle by aisle, heavy and suffocating. Malcolm Hayes stood still, hand resting on his cart full of groceries yet to be paid for, eyes locked on the man spitting venom in his face. 20 years ago, different city, different face, same words. Same judgment handed down without trial, without truth. Stop right there. Empty your pockets, sir. We know what you're doing. The security guard's boots hit the linoleum like a gavel. Phones lifted. Faces turned. A verdict before evidence. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Malcolm Hayes. The air in the store was charged, thick with accusation. A teenage boy whispered, he didn't take anything, but the words vanished under the weight of bias masquerading as authority. Malcolm said nothing. He placed the oat milk gently in his cart, straightened his shoulders, and let silence settle like thunder before a storm. In exactly 20 minutes, every person in this store would understand who they were truly trying to humiliate. And justice wouldn't just walk out unpaid, it would shut the whole chain down. Security, aisle 5. Bring backup. The manager's voice rang through his radio like a fire alarm, not a fact. Heads turned. Boots echoed on linoleum. The air in the supermarket wasn't quiet, Anna Marie, it was charged, electric, ready to split. Malcolm Hayes stood exactly where he had been seconds before. One hand still resting on his cart, the other loose at his side, his posture unnervingly calm. The oat milk sat in the cart untouched, like evidence of his innocence no one wanted to see. The first guard barked again, louder this time, stepped back from the cart. Hoodie pocket out, now. His hand hovered near his belt, not a weapon but a threat. Malcolm's jaw stayed still, eyes fixed on the man who thought volume meant authority. He didn't speak, not yet. Every second of silence tightened the noose they were tying for themselves. A second guard appeared at the end of the aisle, heavier boots, heavier assumptions. We've had too many walkouts this week, he said, scanning Malcolm up and down like a scanner that only read one kind of code. Not today. From 3 steps away, a boy barely 16 lifted his phone higher, red light blinking. A woman near the cereal boxes muttered, he didn't take anything. I saw him put it all in the cart. None of it reached the ears of the men already convinced they were right. Sir, you can make this easy or hard, the manager said, stepping closer, clipboard clutched like a shield. We know the type. You don't want this to get worse. The phrase struck like shrapnel. The type. It was the same phrase Malcolm had heard at 19 when he was made to kneel outside a corner shop for a candy bar he'd already paid for. The same phrase at 25, when a luxury store called mall security because he was trying on a suit above his pay grade. 2 decades and billions later, here it was again. Same tone. Same sentence. Same verdict before trial. His phone buzzed once in his back pocket. A text from Carla, his chief of staff, board meeting ready in 90 minutes. Acquisition contract waiting for your call. Malcolm didn't reach for it. He didn't move. The first guard snapped fingers near his face, sharp, insulting. Hey. Don't ignore me. Show me the pockets or security office it is. Finally, Malcolm lifted his head, voice low but solid as granite. You're not asking for proof. You're asking me to accept guilt for existing here. It landed hard. The boy with the phone whispered, did you hear that? The manager's stance faltered, just for a breath, then he doubled down, louder, desperate. Policy's policy. We don't make exceptions. Malcolm stepped forward 1 inch, the kind of inch that fills a room. Policy isn't the problem, he said, steady, eyes locking on both guards. The problem is how you think it only applies to people who look like me. The supermarket fell silent. Even the checkout scanners paused their rhythmic beeping. For the first time since the shouting started, it wasn't Malcolm on trial. It was them. And as that silence stretched, Malcolm knew this was just the beginning. In less than 20 minutes, the entire chain would know his name. And they would never mistake it again. "Office is ready," the second guard said into his radio, his tone almost triumphant, like this was a game he'd already won. The manager's lips curled, clipboard tapping against his thigh as he stared Malcolm down. "We can walk or you can be dragged. Your choice." Malcolm Hayes didn't answer. He stood still, spine straight, eyes calm but piercing enough to cut through the stale air. The boy filming trembled slightly, shifting angles, whispering into his phone, "They're trying to take him to the back. He hasn't done a thing." Two more customers edged closer now. One older man with silver hair, pushing his own cart, shook his head. "This doesn't look right," he muttered, loud enough to draw a few more eyes. The younger guard barked again, louder, "To drown the doubt, sir, last warning. Security office now or we'll escort you." Malcolm turned his head slowly, scanning the crowd, not the guards. His gaze landed on the boy with the phone, on the woman who'd spoken up earlier, on the older man standing stiff with quiet outrage. "You're all watching this," Malcolm said, voice low but reaching every corner of the aisle. "You know what's happening isn't about rules. It's about who they think belongs here." The words didn't rise, but they struck like a bell in a silent church. The woman spoke up this time, louder, shaking. "He didn't hide a thing. I saw everything he put in that cart. They're lying." The manager whipped toward her, snapping, "Ma'am, stay out of this." "No," she shot back, voice cracking but fierce. "I stayed quiet too many times before. Not today." The boy nodded, emboldened. "I've got this on video. He's done nothing wrong." The guards faltered, glancing at each other. Protocol hadn't prepared them for witnesses refusing to stay silent. But the manager wasn't backing down. He stepped closer to Malcolm, pointing a finger in his face. "You're making a scene. This is your fault." Malcolm didn't flinch. He leaned in just enough for his words to land like a verdict. "Scenes don't make themselves. They're built by men who mistake prejudice for policy." The aisle went still. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights and the slow, steady breath Malcolm took before adding, "Every second you keep this up, you're showing this entire store what you really protect, and it isn't honesty." A murmur swept through the small crowd now gathered near the end cap. Someone whispered, "Isn't that the guy from Forbes? Hayes Group?" Another muttered, "If it is, they just picked the wrong man to mess with." The manager's face reddened, his authority cracking but his pride refusing to let go. "Enough," he snapped at the guards. "Take him." But as the younger guard stepped forward, a hand appeared on his arm, not Malcolm's, but the older man's. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the aisle. "Not until you explain why you're treating a paying customer like a criminal." The silence that followed was different this time. Not tense. Not waiting for orders. It was the sound of a tide shifting, the crowd finding its voice. And Malcolm Hayes knew it. This wasn't just his battle anymore. The store itself was waking up, witness by witness, second by second. In 15 minutes, they wouldn't just know his name. They would know exactly what happens when silence refuses to stay quiet. "Call the cops," the manager barked, his voice cracking as he pointed toward Malcolm. "We're detaining him for theft until they arrive." The words sliced the air like a blade. Every shopper in earshot stiffened. The older man's hand remained firmly on the guard's arm, stopping his next step. The boy filming whispered, "This is crazy, they're really calling the police for nothing." Malcolm Hayes didn't move. He stood there, calm as stone in a rising storm, watching every face around him. 20 minutes ago, he had been another quiet customer in a hoodie. Now, he was a target on trial without a judge, only executioners in cheap security uniforms. The younger guard grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, we need local PD for a non-compliant shoplifter, aisle 5, he said, glancing at Malcolm like he'd already written the arrest report. "Non-compliant?" Malcolm finally spoke, voice low, deliberate, each word hitting like a gavel. Non-compliant with what? The crime you've invented for me? A ripple passed through the crowd. A woman in a red coat raised her voice. He hasn't even left the aisle. You're lying. The manager turned on her, furious. Ma'am, stay in your lane or leave the store. The boy's phone tilted higher. You just threatened a customer for telling the truth, he said loudly, gaining courage. The whole internet's seeing this. The manager's face flushed, but he doubled down, spitting venom to cover the cracks in his authority. People like this think they can walk in, take what they want, cry victim when caught. Not today. Malcolm's head tilted slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief, the quiet kind that's sharper than shouting. People like this, he repeated, his tone heavy enough to silence every murmur. Say it louder, so this whole store hears what you really mean. No one breathed. Even the security guard holding the radio faltered, his finger hovering above the button. Malcolm stepped forward 1 inch, his presence filling the space between every aisle. His voice stayed even, controlled, lethal in its clarity. Every time you open your mouth, you show these people it's not theft you're chasing. It's me. My skin. My presence. My right to stand here like anyone else. The older man nodded sharply. He's right. We've all seen it, he said, looking at the growing crowd. This isn't policy. This is profiling. Murmurs swelled into agreement. Another customer pulled out her phone, recording now. The tide was turning fast, yet the manager couldn't stop pushing. I said take him, he barked at the guards, desperation seeping into every word. The younger guard hesitated, shifting his weight. Eyes darted between Malcolm, the cameras, the witnesses now glaring at him. He swallowed hard but didn't move. Malcolm held his gaze, unflinching. Touch me, he said quietly, and you'll answer for it long before the police arrive. The aisle was dead silent. Every second stretched thin, electric, heavy with a truth too big to ignore anymore. And in that silence, the power began to shift not to Malcolm alone, but to everyone finally standing with him. In barely 10 more minutes, this store would understand who they had tried to erase and why they could never erase him again. Dispatch, confirm ETA on police, the manager hissed into his radio, glancing at Malcolm like a wolf sizing up prey it thought was trapped. The younger guard shifted uneasily, sweat beading under the brim of his cap. Malcolm Hayes stood still, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering. Around him, the circle of witnesses had grown. Phones were out. Faces were tight with anger, disbelief, quiet fear. The boy filming muttered under his breath, "This is wrong, this is all wrong." The manager turned back, voice sharp as broken glass dropped the hoodie. "Empty your pockets. We're not asking again." Malcolm didn't move. His silence stretched, deliberate, like a countdown no one else could hear. 20 years ago, he'd have rushed to prove his innocence, hands out, pleading for reason. But today, he knew better. He knew what they wanted wasn't truth, it was surrender. "I paid for nothing because I haven't left," Malcolm said finally, low, calm. "But you already decided that my presence is a crime." A woman near the end of the aisle spoke up, louder than before. "He's right. We're all watching you harass a paying customer. He hasn't done a thing." The manager snapped toward her, frustrated cracks in his tone now obvious. "Lady, unless you work here, stay quiet or leave." The older man who had stepped between Malcolm and the guard earlier took another step forward. "We're not leaving," he said firmly, eyes locked on the guards. "And you're not laying a hand on him until you explain why you think he's a thief." Murmurs rose, heavier now. More phones lifted. A small wall of customers edged closer, not touching, but forming a quiet barrier of presence. The manager's face went red, the kind of red that comes from a lifetime of unchecked power being questioned in public. He barked orders again. "Take him out, now." The younger guard stepped forward reluctantly, hand twitching toward Malcolm's arm. That's when Malcolm's voice dropped into steel. "Touch me," he said evenly, "and you won't just lose your job, you'll explain it in court, under oath, with every witness in this aisle watching." The words hit like a hammer. The guard froze mid-step, uncertainty written all over him. The store felt like a courtroom now, tension thick, verdict hanging. The boy filming lifted his voice, shaking but loud enough you can't just drag someone because you don't like how they look. Everyone sees what you're doing. The manager spun toward him, put the phone down or get out. The boy's chin lifted. No. That single word broke something in the air. Another customer echoed it. Then another. A chorus of quiet refusals standing where silence had been. Malcolm's eyes moved slowly across the growing crowd, voice steady but carrying the weight of every injustice before this one. You see, it's never just about one man in one aisle. It's about a system that decides some of us are guilty before we even breathe. No one spoke back. Not the guards. Not the manager. The truth was too loud to silence now. And in barely 10 more minutes, this store would learn that power built on prejudice collapses the second people refuse to bow to it. Police are on their way, the manager announced louder than necessary, trying to sound in control, but his voice cracked on the last word. The tension in aisle 5 was thick enough to choke on. Customers who had started as bystanders were now fixed in place, unwilling to look away. Malcolm Hayes stood unmoving, feet planted like the linoleum belonged to him. His silence was no longer quiet, it was command, a presence that made every second harder for the ones accusing him. The younger guard shifted uneasily, eyes flicking to the growing crowd. "Sir," he muttered, tone less certain than before, "let's just step into the office until police get here. It'll be easier." "Easier for who?" Malcolm asked, voice low but heavy enough to still the guard's hand. "Easier for you to write a false report? Or easier to pretend this wasn't profiling from the start?" The older man in the crowd spoke again, firmer now. "You've been asked 3 times to explain what he supposedly stole. You can't. We're all witnesses. Stop this madness before you ruin yourselves." But the manager's pride was a sinking ship dragging everyone with it. He jabbed a finger at Malcolm. "Men like you know every trick. Play innocent now, flip the story later. Not here, not today." "Men like me," Malcolm repeated, tilting his head slightly. The words tasted like rust in his mouth, old, poisonous, recycled 1,000 times in his life. His next words were quiet, but they carried like thunder. "Say it louder. So the whole store hears exactly why you called me a thief." The manager faltered, breath caught in his throat. The crowd murmured louder now, ripples of outrage spreading aisle to aisle. The boy with the phone lifted it higher, his voice shaking but strong. "Go on, say it. Everyone's filming." The second guard glanced at the manager, uncertainty plain in his eyes. "Boss, maybe we should just let this one go," he whispered. "No," the manager snapped, panic creeping into his tone. "If we back down now, we look weak." Malcolm's gaze sharpened, calm but slicing through every false word like a blade. "Weak isn't backing down. Weak is clinging to lies because the truth terrifies you." The silence that followed felt like Judgment Day. The younger guard took a step back, lowering his radio. The crowd's quiet defiance swelled. Phones angled higher. Eyes narrowed on the manager, waiting for an explanation he didn't have. Malcolm inhaled once, deep and steady, the kind of breath that resets a battlefield. Then he spoke clearly, every syllable deliberate. "You wanted me small. You wanted me afraid. But understand this, you can't strip dignity from someone who built his life on fighting for it." Not a soul moved. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder than breath. The weight of his words anchored the moment. In less than 5 more minutes, Malcolm Hayes would make the call that would end this store's illusion of power. But right now, everyone watching already knew the ones in charge weren't in charge anymore. "They're on their way," the manager repeated, his voice louder but no steadier than before. It was a bluff and free fall, and everyone in the aisle knew it. Customers whispered, phones pointed like spotlights, capturing every second of the unraveling. Malcolm Hayes didn't flinch. His cart sat untouched, oat milk still perched on top like an accusation against the accusers. The silence around him wasn't fear, Anna Marie, it was expectation. The room was waiting to see what would happen next, waiting for truth to drown out the noise. The younger guard glanced nervously at his partner, lowering his radio slightly. "This isn't right," he muttered, his voice just loud enough for those nearby to catch. The manager snapped, desperate to pull authority back into his grip. "It's company policy," he barked, gesturing at Malcolm like he was a problem to be disposed of. "We have every right to detain suspected thieves." Malcolm's head tilted, calm but sharp as glass. "Suspected? You didn't suspect. You decided. The moment you saw me." His words dropped like a hammer on tile, echoing down the aisle. The boy with the phone stepped closer, saying what others were already thinking. "Yeah, you decided before he even left the car. We all saw it." The manager turned, face flushed, eyes darting to the growing circle of witnesses. He tried one last time, voice cracking. "People like him always pull this stunt. Cry discrimination when they get caught." And that was the words that made even the guards pause. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother holding her toddler said aloud, "Did he really just say that?" The older man stepped forward again, his voice booming. "Now we've heard enough. You've got nothing on him except your own prejudice." Malcolm finally moved, one slow step forward, not threatening, just undeniable. His voice stayed low, steady, but it carried weight like a verdict already passed. "Every word you've said in the last 10 minutes tells this store exactly who's stealing something here. And it isn't me." The silence after that was thick, suffocating. The guards didn't move. The manager opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Authority had slipped through his fingers, crumbling faster with every camera aimed at his face. Malcolm glanced around at the witnesses, eyes meeting theirs one by one. "You're all seeing it," he said, not as a plea but a statement of fact. "This is what happens when power thinks it can humiliate someone into silence." No one argued. The truth was too raw, too visible to deny. The tension shifted, tilting the room's gravity toward him. And as the seconds ticked by, it was clear whatever illusion of control the store thought it had just shattered. In less than 5 minutes, the call Malcolm was about to make wouldn't just end this scene. It would end their idea of power, permanently. The manager's face was red now, not from authority but panic. Words weren't weapons anymore, they were flailing, desperate attempts to hold on to control he no longer had. Customers surrounded the scene in a quiet half-circle, phones held steady, every lens aimed at injustice unfolding in real time. Malcolm Hayes stood still, calm as ever, but his eyes had sharpened into something colder than silence. The last thread of patience had been cut. He reached slowly into his pocket, not to turn out his hoodie like they demanded, but to take out his phone. He scrolled once, pressed a single contact, and lifted it to his ear. The line picked up instantly. "Carla," his voice was low, deliberate, carrying enough weight to still even the beeping scanners at checkout. "Activate Protocol 7. Effective immediately." The entire aisle seemed to freeze. The manager blinked, thrown off balance by the sudden confidence in Malcolm's tone. "Who the hell are you calling?" "Doesn't matter." "Police are coming," he stammered, but it sounded hollow now. Carla's voice on speaker was crisp, professional, cutting through the tension like a judge entering a courtroom. "Understood, Mr. Hayes. All acquisitions halted. Full corporate compliance team alerted. Media standby engaged." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Mr. Hayes." The name began to spread in whispers. "Wait, is that Malcolm Hayes? Hayes Group?" A woman near the bakery gasped softly, "He's the one buying this chain, it's in the news." The manager paled but tried to recover. "I don't care who you are," he blurted, voice cracking, "in this store, I make the rules." Malcolm's gaze locked on him, steady and lethal as a slow blade. "No," he said evenly. "You just made every mistake possible under them." The younger guard took a step back, radio lowering completely now, uncertainty written on his face. The boy with the phone muttered, almost in awe, "He owns the place or he's about to." Carla's voice came through again, this time louder for everyone to hear. "Sir, corporate board members have been briefed. This incident is now officially logged under hostile profiling. Recommend immediate suspension of on-site management once your order is given." Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The aisle was his courtroom now, every shopper a witness, every second a nail in the coffin of the power that had tried to humiliate him. "Hold that order," he said calmly into the phone, eyes still locked on the trembling manager. "I want them to understand what they've done before we end it." A hush settled, thick and heavy, as if the entire store held its breath. Phones kept recording. Faces leaned closer. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and in a few more minutes, everyone in this supermarket would know that the man they tried to strip of dignity was the one holding their future in his hands. The aisle had gone eerily quiet. Only the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant beep of a checkout scanner dared to interrupt the tension. Every set of eyes was locked on Malcolm Hayes, phone in hand, his calm presence louder than all the shouting that had come before. The manager's face twitched between anger and fear. His voice came out hoarse, strained, as he tried one last time to salvage control. "I don't care who you think you are, you can't just walk in here, ignore rules," and Malcolm raised a hand, not high, just enough to cut the words in half. The movement was simple but carried the kind of authority that doesn't ask for silence, it owns it. "You've spent the last 20 minutes calling me a thief," Malcolm said, his voice low yet somehow filling every corner of the store. "You threatened me, humiliated me, and tried to drag me out for no reason except the one you won't admit out loud." The boy filming muttered under his breath, "He's about to do it," as if sensing what was coming. Malcolm took one step forward, standing between his cart and the men who had cornered him. The crowd leaned in, hungry for truth after so many lies. "My name," he said, slow and deliberate, "is Malcolm Hayes, CEO of Hayes Group. The company finalizing its acquisition of every store in this chain by the end of today." Gasps rippled through the aisle like a wave hitting concrete. A woman near the cereal section dropped her shopping basket. The boy filming whispered, "I knew it, oh my God, he owns them." Malcolm's eyes stayed locked on the manager, each word slicing clean through the last shreds of false authority. "So, you didn't just accuse a customer. You accused the man who's hours away from signing every paycheck in this building. Including yours." The younger guard stepped back, radio dangling uselessly at his side. The second guard froze, eyes wide, caught between disbelief and sudden regret. The manager's lips moved, but no sound came out this time. "All that power you thought you had," Malcolm continued, voice steady as a verdict, "was never power. It was permission to mistreat people you decided didn't belong here. That ends today." The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't tension, it was realization. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were witnesses to a reckoning. Carla's voice came softly through Malcolm's phone, speaker still on. "Mr. Hayes, corporate is standing by for your final decision on this location." Malcolm didn't take his eyes off the men who had tried to strip him of dignity. "Not yet," he said firmly, every syllable deliberate. "First, they hear exactly what they cost this store in the last 20 minutes. The room held its breath. The man they had tried to erase had just put his name on the table, and it was a name heavy enough to crush the false power that had stood against him. Nobody moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigeration units, cold air spilling out of open freezer doors like the truth that had just been unleashed. Malcolm Hayes stood firm, one hand on his phone, the other resting lightly on the cart that now felt like an anchor to the ground beneath his feet. His name had landed in this supermarket like a gavel, and the echo still rolled through every corner of the store. The manager's eyes darted left and right, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Every witness was a wall he couldn't push through. Phones hovered steady in the air, lenses catching every tremble in his stance. The younger guard swallowed hard, his posture collapsing into unease. Malcolm's voice broke the silence, calm but sharp enough to cut steel. "I gave you 20 minutes to show what kind of place this is. 20 minutes to prove you protect truth, not ego. And in 20 minutes, you turned a simple errand into an execution of dignity." The words hit heavy. You could almost hear them sink into the tile beneath their feet. He took a measured step closer to the manager, closing the space without raising his tone. "You accused me without evidence. You threatened me in front of witnesses. You called the police on a man who had done nothing but shop while black. And you expected silence to protect you." A murmur rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. The older man who had spoken earlier crossed his arms, nodding slowly as if to punctuate every word. Now here's the truth, Malcolm continued, his presence filling the aisle as if the shelves themselves leaned closer to listen. This store, this chain, this entire brand you answer to me. And I don't run businesses that mistake prejudice for policy. Carla's voice came through the phone again, crisp, and certain corporate board confirms full authority for immediate personnel action. Your call, Mr. Hayes. The manager's face drained of color. Wait, he stammered, eyes flicking to the crowd, this is all a misunderstanding. We were just following protocol. Malcolm's head tilted, calm but final. Protocol doesn't strip people of respect. People do. He turned his gaze slowly, sweeping across the guards, the manager, every employee who had stood by and watched. Effective immediately, your employment with this company is terminated. You'll be escorted out before this store reopens under new management. The crowd gasped, not in shock but in vindication. The boy filming muttered, finally someone said it. A woman near the front of the group clapped once, sharply, and the sound echoed like Justice Landing. Malcolm raised the phone closer to his mouth, eyes still locked on the men who had spent 20 minutes trying to strip him of belonging. Carla, log every word, every second of this incident. No more excuses. This location will be the first example of what real accountability looks like. The air shifted. It wasn't tense anymore. It was certain. The power that had been wielded so carelessly minutes ago now lay broken on the floor of aisle 5, replaced by something stronger, quieter, unshakable. Malcolm Hayes wasn't just the man they couldn't humiliate. He was the man who would make sure no one else had to survive what he had just endured. For a long beat, the aisle held nothing but silence. It wasn't the uneasy kind anymore. It was final. Like the last page of a story being turned in front of everyone who'd been forced to watch it unfold. The manager's clipboard slipped from his hand, landing on the tile with a flat, powerless smack. The younger guard stared at the floor, lips pressed tight, as if hoping it would open and swallow him whole. The second guard rubbed the back of his neck, his radio hanging useless at his side. Malcolm Hayes stayed where he was, phone still in hand, his presence the only steady thing in a room full of people who had spent the last 20 minutes deciding what he wasn't allowed to be. Corporate action confirmed. Carla's voice came from the speaker, sharp and clear enough for everyone to hear. Manager and on-site security are suspended effective immediately. Regional HR has been notified. Termination files to follow by day's end. The older man in the crowd let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. A few customers nodded, phones still recording, their faces lit with quiet vindication. The manager tried one last desperate grab for control, voice trembling, Mr. Hayes, this isn't fair. We didn't know who you were. Malcolm's eyes narrowed, calm as ever, but his words landed with the weight of 2 decades of history. You didn't need to know my name to know I deserved respect. That's the failure you can't take back. The boy filming spoke up, voice shaky but loud, that's right. If he wasn't the CEO, you'd still be treating him like a thief. Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd like fire. Malcolm stepped closer, not aggressive, just making sure every syllable reached its target. You've turned this store into a place where dignity gets checked at the door for anyone who doesn't fit your picture of belonging. I built my life fighting that picture. And now, you've lost the right to stand behind this uniform, behind this brand, behind any excuse you've been hiding in. The guards exchanged a glance, shame weighing heavier than their badges. They didn't move when Malcolm added, firm but even, hand over your access cards. Leave this store quietly. You'll be escorted out, not dragged. The difference is, I still believe in treating people better than you treated me. One by one, the guards unclipped their badges, placing them on a nearby shelf. The manager hesitated, chest heaving, but finally followed suit. Carla's voice cut in again. New management team will be on site within the hour. Store operations paused until further notice. Malcolm turned to the customers who had stood up, spoken out, refused to let silence win. His gaze softened slightly. Thank you, he said, voice steady but full of meaning. You didn't owe me anything, but you gave what matters most, truth. A ripple of claps broke out, not loud, not performative, just real. The boy lowered his phone, smiling faintly. About time someone with power actually used it right, he murmured. As the disgraced employees walked out under a dozen recording cameras, the aisle didn't feel like a crime scene anymore. It felt like a turning point, a place where a false verdict had been overturned in front of everyone, leaving a truth too heavy to ignore. And Malcolm Hayes knew, as he watched them disappear past the registers, that this was only the beginning. The chain wasn't just changing hands today, it was about to change what it stood for, forever. The doors of the supermarket hissed shut behind the former manager and guards, their departure met not with jeers or insults but a profound, weighty silence. The kind that follows a storm, when people realize the air feels different, cleaner, almost lighter. Malcolm Hayes stood still for a moment, phone in hand, letting the tension drain from the aisle where humiliation had tried and failed to take root. Customers didn't move either. They stayed, eyes on him, because something in the past 20 minutes had shifted not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed what dignity looked like when it refused to bow. Carla's voice came through the speaker, measured and precise. Mr. Hayes, replacement management has arrived at headquarters and will dispatch here in 30 minutes. News outlets are already picking up early reports from customers' live streams. Do you wish to issue a statement now or after you leave the store? Malcolm glanced at the circle of witnesses, at the boy clutching his phone with shaking hands, at the older man who had stood between him and injustice, at the mother holding her child a little tighter. Now, Malcolm said simply, voice steady but carrying far beyond the aisle. Because this isn't just about me. He lifted his chin, addressing everyone around him not like a CEO at a podium, but like a man speaking truth that needed to be said out loud. What you saw here today happens more often than it should, he began, his tone calm but firm. Too many of us are judged before we act, sentenced before we speak, erased before we even pay for what's in our own hands. And too often, silence lets it keep happening. He let the words settle. Faces in the crowd nodded slowly, some biting their lips, some blinking back anger or memory. This store belongs to every customer who walks through its doors, not to fear, not to prejudice, not to people who mistake power for permission to demean, Malcolm continued, his voice rising just enough to reach the registers where clerks stood frozen, listening. That ends today. This chain will not just change owners, it will change what it stands for. Accountability. Respect. And the understanding that dignity isn't something you earn, he writes, something you bring with you, and it stays yours. Applause started small, a single pair of hands clapping near the end of the aisle, then another, and another, until the whole store seemed to breathe out a quiet cheer, not for wealth, not for status, but for justice long overdue. Malcolm turned back to his phone. Carla, full refunds for everyone in this store. Every shopper today gets their groceries free. Send a team tomorrow to hear every complaint ever buried under this roof and make it right. Already processing, Carla replied. Policies across all locations will be reviewed by end of week. Malcolm looked at the cart that had started all this. He picked up the oat milk, placed it gently on the conveyor belt at the register, and paid for it himself. Not because he had to, but because principle wasn't a performance. As he left the supermarket, customers stepped aside, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with respect. The boy filming whispered to his mother, that man just changed everything. Malcolm Hayes didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew that aisle would never host the same kind of silence again, not the silence of submission, but the silence of a fight won and a lesson carved deep into the heart of a store that had once tried to forget his worth.